it was around 2001 that I really became concerned. I sort of had it's like being turned upside down with the recognition of how much energy we needed to reduce in order to meet concerns for climate change. I mean, like 80% reduction by 2050 was the thing that was so clear. And in being involved in the Affordable Comfort Conference, I mean, we were doing good in a program to get 15 or 20% savings and maybe 30% heating and really bad housing stock. And it was like, how could we possibly achieve this level of savings in order to have an impact? So here, everything I'd worked for practically in terms of making energy efficiency cost-effective and practical seemed in question in light of the larger context of where we needed to be. Part of that was inspired by the birth of my grandson and sort of thinking about the world he would inherit. Part of it was just questioning my role, and that if I was supporting the status quo and not the change that we needed to be, I was part of the problem. That's when I got involved in deep energy reductions, and through funding from PG&E, support from ACI's board, we did a number of things related to deep energy reductions, which led to the formation of the 1,000 Home Challenge. And that's been really eye-opening, because it's a different paradigm than the traditional home performance or house as a system, or weatherization, or utility bill reduction, or any of those kinds of things, because it really brings much broader questions into light. It's not just, gee, is the wall insulated? Is the house leaky? Is the duct system bad? It's more, where are we going with this house? And what do we need in order for the house to both meet our needs, but what's possible in terms of totally transforming the way I or we as the occupants use this space, so that we're at least on the path to getting to where we need to be. We might not get there quickly, but the question of how do we make sure every step we take does not create barriers to getting to a really deep reduction in energy use. So I had a neat opportunity, and the Passivhaus movement just was a major inspiration. Talked to John Krieger while he was still, I had just come back from spending several years in Prague. He had just been to the Passivhaus conference, and he was all excited about the Passivhaus movement, and he was telling me about the fact that they'd actually developed systems to insulate the outside of masonry buildings. And they were actually getting these huge reductions in heating, and I was just amazed, because I'd always heard, oh yeah, that's super insulation stuff, but that's not relevant. You know, that's for weirdos. That's for bizarre people who just aren't based in any kind of reality or practicality. You know, it's not it's not something that's gonna ever take on. And then all of a sudden, that kind of stuff became relevant, because the idea of really transforming the way a building uses energy is pretty important. But what was really cool about Passivhaus to me was I loved the metrics. I sat down, I took the metrics, I converted them to units I could understand, and I looked at my house. And I figured out, okay, my blower door readings were whatever, at that time probably 950 or 1,000 CFM50. And I knew my energy use, 150 gallons of oil. And anyway, I did the conversions, and I'm not used to ACH 50 and the same, but I did the conversions, and it was like, oh, to meet the air leakage rate the Passivhaus calls for, my air leakage would need to be like 120 CFM50. And it was like, wow. That was like the recognition that we're really talking about not just making sure that the windows don't leak. We're talking about changing the number of windows or things that open in a house. We're talking about totally changing the systems in a major way. I mean, how would you already, in a house that's pretty tight, by most people's standards, go from 1,000 to 100? So that was just sort of really amazing. And then I was looking at the energy numbers in terms of energy use for heating, and that seemed more doable. It wasn't quite as expensive. But even though they call for very specific ways of reaching those reductions, I mean, you can reach them in any number of ways, but behavior's not an option. It's got to fit the modeling. But I became intrigued by the notion of how I could change my energy use to really really begin to meet these aspirational goals. And that then worked really well. It synced me personally and professionally in a way that was really powerful for me. I became known as the crazy lady that wears two hats. I did some presentations at ACI events, or regional events, keynote, where I put on my hat and said I heated my house to 50 or 55 degrees, so everybody completely thought I was totally nuts and didn't have anything to do with reality. But what I discovered, I mean, it's a journey. It's exploring what's possible. It's like not going with what you're given as the assumptions, but saying, no, the stuff that I've assumed is all up for grabs, and I'm going to re-explore what it means to live well, what it means to be comfortable. And my two hats worked really well. Now I only wear one hat occasionally, not all the time. My thermostat's not set on 50 or 55. It's more like 60 and sometimes 65. But basically, my house is a net zero energy, 2 ductless heat pumps. I really whittled away at all the different loads. I'm continuing to explore. But it really reinforced, and it's really reinforced what the 1,000 Home Challenge, which is all about, which is that if each person takes what they've got and thinks about where they want to be, what their goals are, what their values are, and puts that together and begins the exploration, begins the journey, begins the just to be open to almost inspiration from the universe and from friends and colleagues. But at the same time, we're not just talking about this soft stuff. We're talking about a deliberate path where you look at your energy use and you compare it against a metric, and you use principles that relate to things like, is my house safe to live in? Do I have enough ventilation? Are things working as intended? And anyway, it's just a neat journey to be part of, and hopefully to inspire others to be part of that journey. And so what I've learned from doing this is it is indeed possible, in some cases practical, not always practical, but certainly way more possible than I ever thought, to achieve 80% reductions, 75% reductions in existing homes. It doesn't have to cost. It doesn't have to involve, spending $250,000 on a major homeowner, total home makeover. In some cases, it sure helps if you could spend 20, 30, 40,000 because the house really needs stuff. If you got more money to spend, you can do things really elegantly. But with all the disasters going on, it almost seems like spending a huge amount of money in our real estate's not the best place to put our money. So one discovery was, hey, this is really possible, and there's a huge array, many more ways that we ever thought of getting there. Another really cool discovery for me was that it's a flipping upside down the notion that there's this low-hanging fruit out there, and that we should go after what's most cost-effective first, and then as you do the most practical stuff, then the stuff that's left is much harder to get. And what we found with the 30 projects that have already met the 1,000 Home Challenge is that many people that meet the 1,000 Home Challenge find out that they can go further. And it's not like you've exhausted the opportunity. Instead, it's like you've peeled away the confusion, you've clarified how you use energy, and you can see more clearly what the opportunities are. So if you're on the path and you're aware, and both using a very intentional approach to exploring your energy use and tracking, but often being open to just things that you might not have ever thought of, you can continually reduce your energy use in ways that you never thought possible in a house that already has very, very low energy use. So that's really cool. But then the issue is, well, what's this got to do with home performance? What's this got to do with the ACI community? What's it got to do with weatherization programs and climate change initiatives and all that stuff? And I just find that we've got major, major challenges of complexity, major challenges that to to try to get ventilation right in houses is really hard, because there's so many pieces that are critical to a home's operation that involve the cooperation of the occupants. And to me, that's a huge both opportunity and challenge, because there's a huge cost, there's a huge risk to stick in about bathroom exhaust fans or an ERV, HRV, I mean any array of ventilation system, and just give the homeowner or occupant some information, say bye, see you later. It's like, what assurance do you have that that's going to be maintained, that that's going to operate as intended? I mean, you could so easily have a house go out of balance. We're making houses, in a sense, so much better in some ways, but also more vulnerable. So I think the critical opportunity that we face as an industry is to come together with systems that really address the uncertainty, so that we have, through low-cost monitoring, through Wi-Fi enabled devices, through community level organizations, we have systems in place to make sure that the stuff in homes are maintained, it's operated, that stuff's not going awry. So as we put in a really efficient heating system, air conditioning system, that the filter's actually being changed, because if the filter doesn't get changed, the energy use of the motor can just skyrocket if it's an EC motor. So you've got all these areas that are neat opportunities to basically change home performance from a transaction, where you basically look at a sale, to a service, and you look at a lifetime relationship and well, it doesn't have to be a friendship, but a relationship, a service, so that you're engaging in someone to be a resource for that household, and you're helping to make sure that the systems are working. You're providing feedback. You're making sure that filters are changed, that systems are working as intended, that the relative humidity in the basement is not way out of whack. Ideally, you'd be looking at a number of things in households. So the notion of coming up with the systems that work, that aren't too expensive, that allow us to get to much higher levels of reduction, that are resilient to all the unpredictable stuff about how people choose to live, and that in a sense make it easier to do good work, because you don't have to put in totally foolproof systems that will last for the life of the building, which don't really exist. So those are some of the really neat challenges that I think we've got as opportunities. The other really neat challenge is to rethink everything we've ever thought about cost effectiveness. I know utility programs and other programs have to use cost effectiveness as a measure sometimes, but really the way that we think about what we do needs to be, I think, changed to value proposition. Because if we embrace value proposition as the framework, then we're talking about everything within the benefits that we offer as being the deal. So you're engaging with someone to find out what their needs are, which vary all over the place, what their values are, but you're responding in a much more holistic way, and we're able to do stuff that you couldn't possibly do on cost effectiveness alone, because you're dealing with things like feeling of security, feeling of health, safety, just all kinds of stuff that, maybe just a feeling of pride that I'm doing my share for what I can do for climate change. So it just means that we've got so much more flexibility to create a plan, a path for a household, to just really move to totally transform how they individually are living, and ideally how communities are living.